Don't you think?
I was just meaning generic.
Okay, I'm going to pull away from the table because we have several presentations to go through, and what I'm going to do after each of the presentations is over and you ask your questions of the presenter, then I'm going to come up to the chart here and just ask you to summarize sort of what you see as the takeaway from the information you're receiving, or what impact that information is going to have on your deliberations during the rest of the day, and then actually looking forward through the rest of the year. So I guess I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Pope and Mr. Jones.
Yes, back in for the we're going to get started. You got it.
Good morning, y'all.
Good morning. Good morning.
I got technology, but I also brought.
Yeah.
All right.
Before you get started, would you give us an update on Michael's life?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
If y'all don't know,
Yeah.
Michael Collage has worked with us for a long time. About 2 weeks ago now, she was riding a motorcycle and got hit, and legs and ankles and lots of other things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. She came home yesterday.
Okay.
She'll be, in a 8 to 12 week recovery stage. But she's fortunate to be alive and not having any head trauma. They're glad to have her home. She's got a long road ahead, when you have that kind of injury. She's young, as I always tell her. I think she'll recover quickly, but I will tell him you asked.
okay, great.
I think I have met most of you, but let me introduce myself. My name is Ray Jones. I have been working in Fairfield County probably since, oh goodness, sometime in the early 2000s. I first met y'all when the county really got dialed in on economic development matters, and began to work with prior economic developers, even before Ms. Harrison, prior administrators and prior councils, working on helping to deliver the vision that the council had at the time. And so I think that's appropriate, because I think the bond deal that is, I know, the topic of much conversation, really has its grounding, I think, in an economic development play for the county. And I think when the county has looked around at some of the things that are happening around the county, and I think you can't ignore what's happening in Chester right now, but I think you also have to look at Lexington. You see communities that decided that they needed additional infrastructure to support economic development and also to support other things happening in the county, and decided to make those investments. So for instance, if you go back and look at the Saxagatha Industrial Park, where Amazon is located now in Lexington, the county issued almost $17 million worth of debt specifically for that park to run roads, water and sewer, etc. And of course now that is the location where Amazon is. The Chester project, and I was at the GT Tire opening, y'all are all aware of that, which I think is going to have a ripple effect all up and down I-77. But as the building that we sat in, and the building where all the meetings were held, and the building that was effectively used to market that company, the gateway there at exit 65, which was also an investment by the Chester Facilities Corporation in cooperation with Fairfield County. I think Fairfield has seen its own successes, I'm glad to say. BOMAG is one that comes to mind, that has come and located within a park that has been improved by bond proceeds. I think you will see a number of counties around the state. We're in the middle of working with one right now who basically said to us, we're not on I-77. We don't have kind of some of the natural advantages. Believe it or not, people now view being on I-77 as a natural advantage for economic development. Who would have said that 20 years ago? But we don't have the natural advantages they have in Fairfield or Chester in terms of location and proximity to Charlotte. What can we do to support economic development in this county? And so we're looking at an entire program of figuring out what infrastructure, what roads, what water and sewer, etc. So against that backdrop, let's talk a little bit more about the bond that was issued by the Fairfield Facilities Corporation. I want to do a couple things. I put together some information I brought with me that Mr. Pope and I talked about. And particularly since we have so many new council members, I want y'all to feel free to ask questions. I think the presentation that's up on the board is one we gave last year that also has information in it. But what I wanted to do is first just give you a sense of scale of the bond deal. I wanted to give you a sense of the difference between the bond deal that was done versus a traditional governmental bond deal, and then just step through that a little bit. And then also I want you to understand that at the end of the day, what the council or what the county is doing is they're buying assets from a nonprofit. The Fairfield Facilities Corporation is just like any other asset owner you buy things from. All the things that are being financed by that nonprofit are things that it owns that the council needs to buy from it. And that's not unlike anything else you do as a county when you buy from a vendor or anyone else who owns an asset you want to use. So let me start with a comparison of bond payments on the front page. There's been, I think, a lot of questions about what is the difference between a bond, if the county would have done it, versus the bond that the Fairfield Facilities Corporation did. And so what I did here is on the bottom of this page, you'll see the actual principal interest in what we believe would be the total debt service over the life of the Fairfield Facilities Corporation bond, which you'll see there is $43,200,662.96. And then I compared it to what would have happened had the county, not Fairfield Facilities Corporation, had the county issue $24,690,000 worth of bonds at the same time in accordance with the interest rates that were in effect in 2013. And to be clear, and this is something that we said from the very beginning, there are goals that were sought to be achieved utilizing a nonprofit. Those goals have a lot to do with millage, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you will see, as I have told many counties, the cheapest form of borrowing for any county is to utilize general obligation debt. Now, there are some disadvantages to using general obligation debt. Number one, you only have so much of it under the Constitution. And number two, if you issue general obligation debt, the only means you have to repay it is to levy taxes. You are required, the auditor and the treasurer are required to put mills on to make payments. So the comparison that you see there, I think shows you clearly that a general obligation bond would have been cheaper. There's no question about that. Well, let's flip the page though, and let's look a little bit more deeply into these bond deals. First thing is, a typical general obligation deal would run about 30 years. We were able to do 35 years on the nonprofit's bond deal. The reason we were able to do 35 years is because we wanted to manage millage, for one, and also wanted to give the nuclear facilities that are in Jenkinsville an opportunity to come online. The other key thing I want to show you is the interest rates. Because the interest rate on the top bond deal would have been the county's credit, in other words, the county's ability to levy taxes, the interest rate at the time would have been about 3.45%. Remember, and I think I've explained this before, this financing model is not a unique model to Fairfield. It's been used not only around South Carolina, but other parts of the country. And so when this bond deal was done, the rating agencies in New York that rate the county's debt also had to examine the Facilities Corporation's debt and assign it a rating as well. Because the Fairfield Facilities Corporation is not the county, it doesn't have the same bond rating the county does. It has a lower bond rating, as all nonprofits do that work with counties on similar sorts of financing. So as a result, when you look at the interest rate at the bottom, in the bottom blue box, the interest rate on these bonds was 4.31%. It is expected to be higher because the rating of the debt is not as high. Now the good news is Fairfield County has a good bond rating, and Fairfield Facilities Corporation has a bond rating that is one notch below it, but is also good by any standard. Now, the other thing we looked at is millage increase potential. And I'm going to show you on charts here in just a minute, but I want to highlight for you, had there been a general obligation bond deal done by Fairfield County, there would have been an immediate, significant millage increase. Inescapable, absolute, without question, by law. The reason that the Fairfield Facilities Corporation financing model appealed so much to those that were making the decisions at the time was that the millage was going to increase in a very negligible way and be held steady throughout the term of financing. So if you'll turn to the next page, what I show you, if anybody needs a hard copy, I brought extras in this fall in case you have one. Excellent. The thing I want to show you in the next page is, this is the projection, had there been a general obligation bond done. This is the projection for where the millage rates would have gone. And I point out for you that the gray bars on this chart are roughly where the millage was at the time the bond deal was done. And the gold bars are where the millage would have increased. So it's important, for instance, if you look at 2014 on this chart, you have to add the gray bars at 8.42 to the gold bars at 11.18. So that means your millage would have more than doubled, which is consistent with what's been presented before. It was an estimate that the millage would have gone up and doubled over had GO bars been issued. That situation, the idea that millage would double immediately at the time, was simply not tenable to the citizens, to the county council, or anyone else. And as a result, other options were examined. Now, the option that ultimately was chosen is the option on the next page. I think it's important to look at a couple things here. Number one, the overall debt stays within roughly 10.4 mils. Our projections here actually have it coming in under. And this is the installment purchase deal. Now, here's what's important about this. Mind you, the installment purchase deal, which is a Fairfield Facilities Corporation bond, has its own payment obligations. These payment obligations relate to what the county is doing as it buys assets from the corporation. So it's very important to understand that I think it has been characterized over and over and over as a borrowing to pay a borrower. Well, it's not your borrower. The Fairfield Facilities Corporation is just like any other vendor you buy things from. You're buying assets from the Facilities Corporation, and I'll point out to you now on the next page what you're buying. Underneath the blue box is a general description of the projects that were presented in public session on March 25th, 2013, as part of Ms. Harrison's presentation, where she talked about the projects that were desired to be financed in conjunction with this financing plan. They included economic development projects. They also included quality of life projects, among others. And Mr. Pope, I know at some point you may be talking to council about the status of those projects, and I'll let you do that. But what's important to understand is these projects, as they're being financed, are not owned by the county. They're owned by the nonprofit. Okay? So you're buying water and sewer improvements from the nonprofit. You're buying quality of life improvements from the nonprofit. So not unlike several years ago, and I want to say it was 5 or 6 years ago, David, you have to correct me, when the county decided to go buy its own public works trucks, right? And we had a long discussion about, well, why would the county buy its trucks versus continuing to use a vendor. And the county made a decision, we're going to buy these assets, these capital assets, from a vendor that sells these kinds of trucks because we think we can do it cheaper. Well, so you issued debt to do that. The county issued general obligation debt to buy those trucks. The county, this county, most municipalities around, as Mr. Fantry knows, and others, when they're going to buy a capital project, it is not unusual for them to say, do we want to pay cash for the capital project or do we want to finance it? And it is very common that they finance it because, of course, millage that is used to repay a financing is not limited in the same way as Act 388 millage is. So, and that might be a little more than you want to talk about today, but there is a very, very important strategy on utilizing the ability to purchase assets from the nonprofit versus having the county constantly have to come up against the Act 388 millage cap or have the county come up against this 8% debt limit cap. So, you're buying these projects over time from the nonprofit. When you issue a general obligation bond, you are purchasing assets from the nonprofit. Likewise, when you issued a general obligation bond to buy public works trucks, you purchase those trucks from the public work trucks vendor. Now, when the money goes to the vendor, okay, then the vendor does whatever it does with it. So in the case of the public work trucks vendor, they probably paid off financing they had on the public works trucks. You know, there's something called floor plan financing. Those folks that sell vehicles normally finance them, and they sell them to you. So when you pay for them, okay, they turn around and they pay salaries, they pay the cost, they do what they do. In this case, when you buy assets, which is what you're doing, and by the way, under state law, that's all you're allowed to do with general obligation debt, is purchase capital projects. You can't simply float payments for state law purposes. You're buying assets. So here, when you buy assets from the nonprofit also pays its expenses, okay, which includes the money the nonprofit borrowed to build the assets. It's just that simple. Now, this is also very important, and I'll point you to the very last point on the left side of this slide. The general obligation bonds that the county is issuing to buy assets from the nonprofit, the millage associated with those general obligation bonds, the cost to the taxpayer is here. It's in this model. The mills that are represented on this chart are the mills that have always been anticipated to be needed to issue small GO bonds to buy assets from the nonprofit. The final thing I would say is, there's been a lot of question about, well, what happens when, if the nuclear plant should come online? The reason that, one of the other reasons that this method of financing was selected is the Fairfield Facilities Corporation asks that Fairfield County buy assets from it and asks by contract that it get payments every 6 months. The Fairfield Facilities Corporation doesn't care where the money comes from. It doesn't require